Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to another edition of Explained, the unique explanatory discussion that the Indian Express hosts on topics of current and contemporary relevance. I am Monojit Majumdar, editor for explanatory journalism at the Indian Express. Some of you have been part of Explained before, either at the physical event that has been running in Delhi and Mumbai for the last 5 years, or at the online forum such as this one since the lockdown began. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Explained is the explanatory aspect of the journalism of the Indian Express, where we go beyond the news, connect the dots, draw parallels, and bring you the big picture that helps in a deeper, fuller understanding of what's going on around us. Today, we meet exactly 2 weeks after 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives in clashes with the Chinese army at the line of actual control in Ladakh. There are many questions. The border has seen sporadic tensions, but how did the situation escalate so much? What do the Chinese want? And where are we headed from here on? To explain the issues around the clashes and the overall context of increasing tensions with China, we have with us this evening Gautam Bambawale, who served as India's ambassador to China from the end of 2017 to the end of 2018. Ambassador Bambawale, now retired, is an old China hand and someone who has dealt with the diplomatic leadership of that country for many years. Excellency, welcome to Explain. We are privileged to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Speaking to Ambassador Bambawale will be my colleague and the diplomatic editor of the Indian Express, Shubhajit Roy. Shubho will start with a short presentation to lay the ground for the discussion, which will follow. Thereafter, we will take some questions from the audience. Welcome to all of you once again. Shubho.
Thank you. Thank you, Monojit. We are indeed privileged to have Mr. Bambawale, one of the most candid Indian diplomats I've met while covering foreign affairs. Of his career of more than 30 years, he has been directly involved in India-China relations and shaping them for 17 years. But before I turn to him for today's session, I will try to set the context with a short presentation. So as we know that the violent clashes between Indian and Chinese troops took place at the Galwan Valley on 15th of June, in which 20 Indian soldiers died, including one colonel rank officer. The Chinese casualties are unknown, but their ambassador has acknowledged casualties for the first time last week. The face-offs, as most of you know, started early May at 3 to 4 locations. And they have increased in the last few days. Depsang Plains is a new site where the face-off, the standoff has begun. India and China have at least several meetings at different levels. There are meetings at the military level, at least 10 meetings at the senior military levels. Diplomats in India and China have met through video conference twice. Ambassadors are in touch with each other and with the senior officials in the government. What makes the Galwan clash different is its violence along the LAC after 45 years. And since this is the first incident since 1975 when 4 Indian soldiers were ambushed and killed in Arunachal Pradesh. The last incident with high casualties took place in 1967. So Galwan is actually the deadliest in 53 years. 1962 war, as you all know, was the last and the only war between India and China. Now, if you go through the trajectory of the relationship, the diplomatic relations started in 1950, on 1st of April. After that, the war was a setback to the ties. But in 76, actually, the ambassadors were restored and to the full-scale level. After that, there were high-level visits, which started with then Foreign Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who visited China in 79. But the real watershed moment was the Rajiv Gandhi visit in 1988, when he visited China after so many years. There was a leader level, and Gautam Bambawale was actually present there in China at that point of time. He was serving there, starting in his early years of his career. After that, there have been several visits. Narasimha Rao went there, Vajpayee went there, Manmohan Singh went there. But Prime Minister Modi has visited China at least 5 times in the last 6 years, which is maximum by any prime minister in the last 70 years, and has met Chinese President Xi at least 18 times. These are both one-on-one meetings as well as on the sidelines of multilateral summits like G20 and other such multilateral summits. Now, there is a history of past border standoffs between the two countries. 86, 87, we had a long border standoff at Sumdarangchu in Arunachal Pradesh. And then thereafter, there have been several. In 2013, Depsang is important because Gautam Bambawale actually was one of the key negotiators to resolve the standoff. So after that, the recent one you all know was in Doklam in 2017. Now, the Galwan clash also violates several bilateral agreements and understandings between the two countries, at least since 1993. There are at least 5 agreements between the two sides: 1993, 1996, 2005, and then 2012 and 2013. The 2013 agreement was negotiated, in fact, by Gautam Bambawale as well. And 2012, the working mechanism, he was the first joint secretary interlocutor on that side. Then there are understandings between the two topmost leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, which also those understandings of keeping peace and tranquility at the border have also been violated with the Galwan clash. And then there are border talks between the two countries that have taken place since 2003, the latest round, because earlier attempts did not lead to any results. This time, there have been 22 rounds have taken place till last year. This is the lay of the land for just to give you a context of the topography, which all of you have read at the Indian Express pages. This is a map of the Galwan, as you can see, the Daulat Beg Oldie, which is close to the Karakoram Pass. You can see Shok, Darbuk, all these places. The key area, the theater where the current tension is underway. And Gautam has been very, very key to resolving the past standoff at Depsang. So he has a very good understanding of the topography and the terrain as well. So we are indeed very privileged to have you, Mr. Bambawale. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Bambawale, to start with the Galwan clash on June 15th, please explain to us, to our viewers, what is different this time about the Galwan clash and about the build-up that took place since April, May this year?
Thank you very much, Shubhajit, for that question. And let me say, I'm very happy to be on your show. And I do hope that, your viewers, your participants will get a better understanding of what's happening in Eastern Ladakh after this program. If you also permit me, let me start with a little bit of civilizational approach, history, philosophy, because I think that puts a whole lot of other things which happen between India and China in perspective. And of course, then I'll come to your direct question about what is different. You see, the Indian and Chinese civilizations are both ancient civilizations. But India's civilization can be summarized in 1 or 2 words with what we call Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that the world is one family. So we look upon different parts of the world as one family. And as a result of that, you will see that Indians in general are quite welcoming, warm with other countries, with other peoples, and to the extent where we also got colonized. On the contrary, on the other hand, the Chinese way of thinking can be summarized in the word China. In Chinese, China is referred to as Chungguo, which means middle kingdom or middle country. And their approach is that they are the center of the world and everything else revolves around them. So they're at the center, everyone is peripheral. They're at the center, and so they're very self-absorbed, they're very selfish, and they only worry about themselves. So you must start with this premise where there are two different peoples with two different approaches. Now, to come down to your direct question about Galwan and what's happening in eastern Ladakh, in the past, there used to be stray patrols which sometimes came face to face with each other. But the number of troops was very small. It could be 40, it could be 50, it could be 100. But it was roughly that size.
Less than 100.
Up to 100. It could be 100, 150. But it was only in the hundreds.
Okay.
This time round, there is a whole build-up which has taken place in eastern Ladakh. The Chinese military has planned for this. It is therefore, as the government says, the whole build-up is premeditated. I don't know if your listeners know that in eastern Ladakh, not right at the border, but little bit in depth, there are several divisions of the Chinese army which are ready and prepared. At least 3, 4, or maybe even 5 divisions of the Chinese PLA. Now, this can't happen overnight. What they did was they were planning in early April to do some kind of exercises, military exercises in this area, and they quickly diverted the forces to the eastern part of Ladakh. I would also like to inform your listeners and viewers that India has done a corresponding, as they have been reading in the newspapers, India has done a corresponding military build-up, and therefore the large numbers which are involved this time shows that this particular, what is happening in eastern Ladakh in summer of 2020 is quite different from what has happened in the past, including, as you rightly said, what happened in Depsang, which is also in that part of India, in April and May of 2013. So this is why it is different. This is why we say it is well thought out, pre-planned, premeditated.
So how serious is this particular situation compared to the previous situations?
Yeah. So, Shubhajit, you know, when the PLA comes after having planned and after having prepared for this kind of thing, it's not that there is an accidental face-off between smaller groups of troops who may be patrolling that same area.
Right.
This is something different. So you have to ask yourself the question that why is he doing it? What is his message to us?
Right.
And I think, let me say that as far as I am concerned, there are 2 reasons why he is doing it. One is a tactical reason, one is a strategic reason. The tactical reason is very simple. He is trying to move his ground positions where his troops actually are right up to the point which he considers to be his LAC, or line of actual control.
Right.
Now, remember that there is no agreed boundary between India and China. Also, we have great differences of opinion. There is no agreed line of actual control between the 2 sides. So when he does such a thing, which is to move to actually control the ground right up till the point which he considers to be his LAC, in effect, what he is doing is unilaterally determining and defining that LAC. Whereas this is a line between 2 sovereign countries. It has to be determined and it has to be defined and it has to be clarified between these 2 countries through negotiations and talks. Right. And that is what we have been trying to do over many, many decades, but we have not been able to agree to it. Now what he is doing is he is wanting to define this line unilaterally, bring his troops right up to the line and present us with a fait accompli. This is on the tactical side. On the strategic side, what is the message that he is trying to send? He knows very clearly that maintaining peace on the India-China border is a prerequisite for the relationship to move ahead. So if he undermines peace on the border, he says, I do not want to have the current kind of relationship that I have with India. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to browbeat us, he's trying to bully us, He's trying to show, I am the superpower in Asia, and you just have to take that lying down and quietly. India has shown tactically on the ground that we will not take this lying down and quietly. Our troops are mobilized in Galwan. We have blocked him at the LAC. And our bottom line for the negotiations is the Chinese must restore status quo ante, which means they must go back to the situation as it existed before they started all these movements. So this is why he's doing it. On the tactical side is one, on the strategic side is one. But I think the most important message that that India has sent is that we will not take this lying down. We do not accept Chinese hegemony. We will not accept Chinese bullying.
This particular thing that you explained just now, it also shows us that, the Chinese were far higher in numbers. Also at various locations, at least 5 locations, 4 to 5 locations by now, spread across the Eastern Ladakh, the LSC, and also the aggression levels are quite high. From what we now know from the June 15th clash, it was a very sort of violent clash that took place. Now we are aware about the Indian casualties. Obviously, there were 20 soldiers, we know, and the government has been public about it. But the Chinese casualties have been unknown. Why is that? What prevents China from declaring their casualties?
That's a good question. They have traditionally never declared their casualties immediately after a clash or even a war. They take a few years, maybe even a few years to declare their casualties. I think this is part of their system. Their system is like that. They're not an open, transparent system, whereas we are. In fact, we have to be open and transparent because we know that eventually there are bodies which are going back to their families of brave soldiers who have died. And therefore, we have to come up with it. But also, let me say, Shubhajit, that as many of our listeners and viewers must have heard, the Indian Army gave a very good account of itself that night of June the 15th, despite being taken by surprise a little bit. They had expected, they had prepared, but eventually when the attack came on our commanding officer, it was a bit of a surprise. But after that, the Indian Army gave a very good account of itself. And as you know, that our sort of estimate of the casualties suffered by the Chinese PLA is higher than what our casualties are. I don't have a precise figure. We will never know a precise figure.
How do you come to that conclusion?
Well, we have come to that conclusion on the basis of what we have heard from people who have been on the ground. Okay. And I don't have a precise figure. Our Minister of State, who was a former general of the army, the chief of army staff, has put the figure at 43. I don't know if it is 43, whether it's 23 or whether it's 63. But I am told by all accounts that the Indian Army gave an excellent account of itself. You can expect many casualties on the PLA side. And what is more important, we can quibble about the numbers of PLA casualties. What is more important is that for the first time, the PLA has taken battlefield casualties in over 4 decades. Yeah. And I think that is a big message that we have sent, that our Indian Army has sent on the ground to the Chinese PLA. Right. Also, let me add quickly that you said that they are in larger numbers, but let me also add that the Indian Army has also mobilized and is there in the forward areas in equally large numbers. So right. Let me stop there and leave the floor to you, Shubhajit.
Right. So just to give a context about the casualties, the 1962 war casualties were declared by China only in 1994. So almost after 32 years. So it's not surprising that China has not yet revealed the number of PLA casualties. But just because you have a historical experience, of China, having studied, having studied Chinese, and also serving there since the late 80s, mid 80s. You went to China when Deng Xiaoping's China, and as a student of Chinese, as a young diplomat. 30 years later, there is a Xi Jinping's China. So this broad arc, how have you seen this relationship and this China change in front of your eyes?
Well, the biggest change, of course, has been the economics of the country. In, as you rightly say, say, if you go back to the late 1980s, in 1988, China's GDP was almost the same as India's GDP. Today, 40 years later, as we all know, China's GDP is roughly 4.5 times that of India. So, and of course, China itself has changed. Many of your participants and viewers would have been to China, traveled to China. They have seen the roads, they've seen the high-speed railway. I can tell you that when I first reached Beijing and I first saw Beijing airport in early 1988, in say March of 1988, the airport at Beijing was much worse than the airport in New Delhi. So and today, of course, there's both airports have improved, but China in Beijing have 3 separate airports.
Okay.
So the economics of it has definitely changed. China has become the second largest economy in the world with a GDP of roughly 13 and a half, maybe even 14 trillion US dollars. And what has happened is that in the 80s, they used to abide by what was Deng Xiaoping's famous dictum that China must hide its strength and bide its time. Now it has bided 4 decades and it has grown very fast in these 4 decades at roughly a GDP growth rate of 10% every year. Now, the current leadership, definitely under President Xi Jinping, and more importantly than his position as president, is his position as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China. They believe that their time has come and that they have to show how powerful they are. And they're doing this all over the world. They're doing it in the South China Sea by taking over and building new islands, man-made islands, which they then immediately start to militarize. They're doing it aggressively in Hong Kong with a new security law, which means basically that the one country, two systems formula under which China took back the sovereignty over Hong Kong is dead in the water. They are threatening Taiwan. They have a trade, technology, and a wider sort of battle with the United States. And they are also heating up the India-China border. So they're aggressive all around. As you rightly said, their troops are aggressive. But, where their troops are aggressive, let me say that two can play the game. Our troops were also very aggressive on the night of June 15th in the Galwan River Valley.
So it's interesting to see that Xi Jinping became the General Secretary of the party in November 2012 and became the president in March 2013. And the first standoff after many years took place in April 2013, within a month of him taking over as the president. And since then, we have had 3 standoffs, and this is the 4th standoff we are having at the border, at the LSC. Now, you were there negotiating the Depsang standoff in April 2013, which lasted for 3 weeks. Now, if you can take us back to that time, because the theater is the same, the Depsang plains. So how did the negotiations take place, and what ultimately led to the resolution after 3 weeks without loss of life?
Yeah. So as you know, let me start with the last bit first and then come to actually what happened in 2013. But you know that India and China, we both know that there is no agreed boundary between us. We even know there's no agreed line of actual control between us. We have an idea of where the line of actual control, the LAC, lies. They have an idea. And very broadly, we stay out of each other's way. But in the past, as I told you, there could be accidental patrols from India running into similar patrols from the Chinese side. But what we did was, over these agreements which you mentioned in the start, starting from 1993, we realized that we must put in place some operating procedures, some principles for maintaining peace and tranquility. So there were a whole series of agreements of 93, 96, 2005, 2013, where different principles of how to maintain peace on the boundary were put into place. And very largely, those were maintained right till 2020. In fact, even in 2020, weapons have not been used in terms of firing of guns.
Right.
But all the tenets of these agreements for maintaining peace on the India-China border have been broken by the Chinese side, and therefore we are in a very difficult situation. In fact, I have, as you rightly said, right since even Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, the then Prime Minister of India's visit to China, when this whole current paradigm or the template in which India-China relations is conducted, that we continue to discuss the boundary on the one hand, and the rest of the relationship, whether it's economics or culture or students or tourism, will move ahead. That was decided at that time, and it has continued till now. So I feel, very regrettable that the Chinese PLA has now, taken years of hard work on both sides, on the Chinese side and the Indian side, and have thrown it down the Galwan River and have violated every tenet of the agreements that we had reached. Coming to Galwan itself, as I told you, in the past, even in 2013 in Depsang, it was smaller numbers of troops. And eventually we were able to negotiate. What happened was that just in 2012, we had established what is called the working mechanism for consultation and coordination on border affairs. Right. So I was in touch with my counterpart in the Chinese Foreign Ministry. I picked up the phone and called him. We had large number of discussions. The military level talks on the ground also continued, as they are doing right now. But eventually we had a sort of trump card in our hand, which was that the then Prime Minister of China, who was a relatively new Prime Minister of China, he wanted to visit India and make India one of the first countries he visited. And we told them very clearly that there can be no such visit unless this face-off at Depsang is brought to an end and the status quo ante is restored. So that happened at that time, but that was a different ball game, and this is a completely different ball game for two reasons, Shubhajit. One is the large numbers of troops on both sides. The second is, as I spelt out to you and your viewers, the intentions that the Chinese are showing now in 2020, which were not the intentions that they showed in 2013.
So you made it conditional, the visit to be conditional, subject to the resolution of the standoff. That status quo ante must be restored if the Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao can visit India.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't Wen Jiabao. It was the new Prime Minister.
New Prime Minister.
Prime Minister of China.
Right.
Li Keqiang.
Li Keqiang. So tell me something. In this kind of a situation, for people who have never been in a diplomatic negotiations room, give us a sense of how do you do this negotiation if you get a sort of a message from your military leaders that there has been a standoff. Do you schedule the phone call? Do you have a one-on-one meeting? How does this give us a sense of the room that negotiations take place?
So that's an excellent question, Shubhajit, and it varies from situation to situation. But let me take 2013 in Depsang.
Right.
So what we did was basically the troops on the ground told us they had their discussions also about what's happening, and I picked up the phone and spoke to my counterpart in Beijing. But we also used the offices, because the person on the ground was our embassy and our ambassador.
Right.
And in 2013, our ambassador to China, and in Beijing was, of course, Dr. S. Jaishankar, who's today the External Affairs Minister of India.
Right.
So he used to convey our messages also to the Chinese side, to the Foreign Ministry of China. And there were several rounds of such, such messaging from both sides, saying clearly what was, what should be done, what can be done, etc. And then eventually, we insisted that our bottom line is that there will be no such visit by your Prime Minister unless this thing is resolved completely, even before the visit can be prepared or planned. We won't even start planning for the visit till the Depsang incident has been resolved. So that's how it eventually worked out. And of course, today, of course, Dr. Jaishankar is our External Affairs Minister. So I think the situation is in very good hands.
Yeah. In fact, in 2013, towards the end, in October, there was the Prime Minister's visit from India to China as well, where this border defense cooperation agreement was signed between the two sides, which was negotiated by officials like you and Mr. Jaishankar. Then you went back to China in 2017-18 to hold the Wuhan summit, which is actually a new kind of template between the two countries, which suffered a sort of a setback in terms of the Doklam standoff. Tell us a bit about this particular summit, how it sort of helped in completely destabilizing the relationship once again.
Yeah. So let me tell you, Shubhajit, and your viewers about what was the thinking on our side, and definitely, we conveyed it to the Chinese side also about informal summit. You see, in a formal summit, what happens is that you have to go to the capital city of the other country. There have to be the bells and whistles in terms of a formal, like we do at Rashtrapati Bhavan. There has to be a formal guard of honor, and then this and that, and you have to meet a whole lot of the leadership of China. We thought, rather than doing that through an informal summit, the number one leader of India, which is the Prime Minister of India, currently, of course, and in 2018, Mr. Modi, and the topmost leader of China, who runs that country basically, which is Mr. Xi Jinping, that they could spend as much time together to talk about where the relationship is headed. Because already what we had seen was that while there are broad areas of cooperation between India and China, the number of areas of non-cooperation or discord or competition, as people call it, were increasing. And therefore, we thought that a direct chat for as long as possible between the two top leaders would help in moving this situation and forming a new kind of template or paradigm for India-China relations. But let me cut forward to 2020. I think, as I have shared with all of you, that China has very clearly given a signal in the summer of 2020 that it is the number one power in Asia. They don't look at this as an Asian century. They look at it as a Chinese century. They do not look at India as any kind of competition. They want India to roll over and let them steamroll over us. And accept our position in the pecking order as being much lower to China. I think this is a clear-cut message which is being sent by the Chinese, and therefore, let me say that what message India has sent on the ground through our military, that we will not accept your hegemony, we will fight back, we will not accept your bullying. I believe that the same message will now have to be sent through policy decisions made by the government of India. And therefore, policy decisions which will show that it cannot be business as usual, because the whole game situation has changed. And therefore, I have recommended that the government of India must with other opposition parties and maybe people who are experts across the field, must take a cool, calm, rational, calculated decision about how to reset, how to recalibrate India's China policy. It has to be done quickly. It cannot take years for a consensus to be formed. We have to do it in the next few months and then implement a new reset, recalibrated, reassessed China policy before the end of 2020, before the year is out.
So you made a very important point about reassessing, recalibrating the India-China, paradigm, which was set in 1988, and when there was this twin-track sort of approach that was adopted, that while you have a border dispute which is ongoing, that should not let the other aspects of the relationship go. That should not affect it. So the economic ties actually went upwards, and now we have almost close to $100 billion trade between the two countries. So I understand that, and I'll come to those options. But before that, I want to sort of really understand from you, what are the drivers of Chinese this behavior that we have seen in the last 7 weeks now. One of the things that you've highlighted, that that they see it as a Chinese century, they see it as a hegemony, and the pecking order in the hierarchy in the region is they are on top of the ladder. Are there other drivers as well? For example, the infrastructure development that India is doing at the local level, is that a driver as well?
No, it could be a driver of what is happening on the ground. But when you look at it from a larger strategic perspective, I think the message that the Chinese are giving is very clear. And therefore, those smaller pinpricks like India building roads in Ladakh, etc., those are now unimportant. They may be one of the many reasons, but the really important thing is, please understand that we are the most powerful. We have the military power, we have the economic power, and that you better, better know your place in the world. Right. So I think that is the most important factor, motivational factor. And why the Chinese are doing it? Because they think they're strong enough.
Right.
And I don't know if, and this is why let me link to what I said right at the start. You have to understand what kind of people and psychology they have, where they are so self-absorbed and so self-involved and so self-interested that they only think of their own interests and no one else matters.
Yeah. So you rightly, initially, you put the architecture of their civilizational ethos as like the Middle Kingdom and under the heaven, the concept that they have in mind.
Absolutely, Shubhajit. And why I made that point and why I'm linking it here is because we in India don't understand this, because we are very friendly. We are friendly with all peoples. When a foreigner comes, he is greeted and treated very well. And so our ethos is very, very diametrically opposite from that of China. And most of our people do not understand this, and it's a very important motivational factor.
Do you see that, they have been under a lot of international pressure on the COVID-19 pandemic situation? Some analysts have also linked it to a diversionary tactic. Is it a diversionary tactic for Beijing?
Yeah, no, it could be. What you're saying, this may be one of the many factors, but I think it's not the primary factor. Okay. But you're not wrong, because, they have come under some international pressure from all countries about the spread and the origins and the way the virus and the pandemic spread. And their reaction has to be to hit out in all directions. So, one of the ways that they've hit out is through what is referred to as wolf warrior diplomacy, where their diplomats have started, doing what their army is doing on the India-China border. Their diplomats are doing in areas where they're posted. So it could be because of that. It could also be because there are some pressures domestically within China. And one way to get the support of the Chinese people to fire up their nationalism through some kind of brief border a border incident or something like that. So these could be reasons, but I think these are supplementary reasons. The main reason is what I discussed and I sort of shared with all of you.
So is President Xi's leadership under threat? Is it weakened? Do you see that as a possible factor?
Look, I'm not 100% sure. It depends mainly on the economic situation in China. And we are not getting too much. We're only getting glowing reports about how the Chinese economy is recovering from COVID, etc. We don't get what is the true situation on the ground. And the reason for that is because the Chinese Communist Party controls all the levers of information within China. Even foreign journalists, many of them who used to do investigative reporting, have been thrown out. So if the economic situation is bad, then I think they would need to fire up the nationalism card and use the nationalism card. And one way to do it is through this border incidents with India.
Mr. Bambawale, some analysts have also linked this situation with the revocation of Article 370 in Kashmir. How much do you think that also could have played a factor, could have played a role in Chinese behavior right now?
No, I tend to agree with you that it may have been a factor. But please remember that, we had immediately after, in August 5th of last year, our foreign minister, our external affairs minister, Dr. Jaishankar, had actually visited China and explained to his counterpart that, look, this is a change which we have made domestically, internally within India, which we have every right to do.
Right.
And it didn't really change the external boundaries of India, which in any case are contested on both sides, both Pakistan and China. And to resolve those boundaries, we still need to eventually negotiate with both the countries. So I thought that would be the end of the matter. Maybe the Chinese read it differently. There could be some aspect to it, but that can only explain, up to a tactical level. I think the strategic thinking, that we have to show India its place, and we have to show the rest of the world and the rest of Asia who we are, I think is a more important strategic motivational aspect.
What about, linked to this is India's proximity to the US as perceived by China. Do you think that and the recent years, the Quad mechanism has been revived? Last year, there was a foreign ministers meeting of the Quad countries. Do you think that has been read by China, by Beijing as a provocation?
Look, if you want India to step away or be more distant from the United States, what would be the policy you follow? You will smile and you will try to show some friendship with India to keep it away. But by needling us and creating a border situation which didn't exist, violating all the agreements which have been signed to maintain peace and tranquility, having soldiers on both sides killed for the first time in 45 years, you think this is going to keep us away from the US? It is, I think, pushing us further into the arms of the US.
Right.
And I have no doubt that, the India-US partnership, the India-Japan partnership will be strengthened immeasurably after we reassess and reset our China policy, or as a part of this reset of China policy.
So to reassess and recalibrate or reset the China policy, you talked about earlier, you hinted about consultation with in a national consultation. So what do you mean by national consultation?
No, I think, we should not, first of all, there should be no knee-jerk reactions. We should calmly, rationally think this through, put on the table what are the options, what are the pros and cons for each option, and then adopt one of or several of those options. Now, in order to do this, there needs to be a national consensus. So I would recommend and I would advocate that the government should consult as widely as possible. But at the same time, this cannot go on for years. As I said, it needs to be in a finite time of a few months. So I believe they should even consult the opposition parties, because that is the true consultation in a democracy. But they should also consult other people like military strategists and former generals who know the terrain very well, maybe others who are expert in India-China affairs, others who understand the Chinese mind. I think they should consult such people, then draw up a list of what are the options, and then implement those options either at one go or over time. All this can be decided through such a consultation. But one of my inputs, and other people have also suggested this as an input, is definitely to ensure that Chinese companies are no longer able to participate in India's 5G trials and the eventual rollout. And that will hit China where it hurts, in the pocket, because India is a huge potential market for 5G.
Yeah. I'll come to this point of how to impose economic cost on China. Before that, I want to just hold your thought there. When you are talking about political consultation with opposition, you think Prime Minister Modi should reach out to Congress president or Congress leaders, Rahul Gandhi, or opposition leaders like Mamata Banerjee, and take their inputs as well while framing the policy, apart from the military thinkers, strategic thinkers, experienced diplomats like you?
Look, Shubhajit, I am totally apolitical. I am looking at things from India's perspective. And these things, I am not the best person to advise on or to even recommend how it should be done. I think the political parties know better. We should leave it to them, and we should, go by whatever they decide as far as this widespread consultation on a new China policy is concerned.
Right. You talked about the economic cost. One of the things that you talked about, the 5G rollout, how India should, not allow Chinese companies who are way to bid for it, participate in the trials. Now, there have been a lot of talk about boycott of China goods. Now, in the economic reality that we live in, the Chinese economy, Chinese trade is deeply entrenched into our social, personal, economically linked. Today, if we have less than 15,000 mobile phones, mobile phones which cost less than 15,000, or laptops which are less than 15,000, and which are affordable for students in this country, it is largely because of these Chinese companies. How difficult it is, or how easy it is for India to actually sort of go along with this boycott China goods, Chinese goods campaign?
No, that's a very good question. Let me start by saying, Shubhajit, that any kind of measure that we take will involve some pain. So if you think that, resetting a China policy is going to be painless, then I think, we need to correct ourselves. Let me also say that, in order to show that India is not accepting Chinese hegemony, just as our soldiers have taken pain on the ground on the border, it will be necessary for all Indians, you, me, everyone else, to accept some degree of pain, and it will mainly be economic.
Right.
So to come back to the boycott question, look, I agree with you that in today's day and age, in a globalized economy, it may not be able to do a across-the-board boycott. But we must study, and this is where we need to consult. We must study where a boycott of Chinese products will actually hurt some of their companies. And I think there is no better area than telecom. And as well as I do, that the top telecom handset makers in India are all Chinese companies. I believe the government need not take a decision on this. But if all of us, you, me, and the hundreds of people who are watching our program today, decide that we will not buy a Xiaomi or an Oppo or a Vivo phone, but will only stick to, say, a Samsung phone. Uh, I think even if large numbers do it, it will impact these companies, and it will send a strong signal and a strong message. So even though many of us are not able to fight the Chinese on the border, and our army is doing a wonderful job, a professional job of it, we can do something of this sort. And I think we have to decide and target where we will take such measures. I think across the board boycott may be difficult, but we have to discuss it before we implement it.
Right. One of the things that when I was studying this particular issue, and the Indian government or Indian side may think that we have an economic relationship where we can hurt the Chinese. From the Chinese perspective, is Indian market as important if you compare it to, say, Southeast Asian markets that they have, or the Western European markets, or the American market that they have? How important are our market to them, to their economy?
Well, the answer to that is very simple. There are certain sectors where our market is important, and it will definitely hurt if we are able to target those sectors. It will definitely hurt the individual companies, Chinese companies involved.
Right.
So we need to do a study on this, and we need to take a view on it, but we need to do it collectively, as I said.
Right. The other thing is about the reputational cost that India can possibly, inflict on China. For example, there are issues that they're sensitive to, from Tibet to Taiwan to COVID-19, and Can India inflict some damage by publicly raising these issues on global platforms? Do you think that could be a pain point?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I will answer it. Let me start by saying that, obviously, before the Chinese undertook this prepared move in Eastern Ladakh, they would have thought about this, and I think they don't care much about reputational costs. But you're not wrong. I think we can, show them where to get off by changing our policies, by strengthening our partnerships with democracies across the world, by strengthening the quadrilateral security initiative, by giving it a military angle, by increasing intelligence sharing, by ensuring that Australia is a part of our Indian Malabar naval exercises, in which the US and Japan are already participating, by expanding our relationship with Taiwan, both economically as well as, in a sense, politically. And I'll give you an idea about the political part of it. Taiwan has requested to open another office of the TECC, the Taipei Economic and Cultural Committee, in Mumbai. So right. I think we should immediately give them permission. I think that's one way of showing, which side our bread is buttered on.
Right.
And of course, also to the extent possible, using the Tibet card, as you have been arguing.
Right. You talked about the Quad and strategic relationships that are there, with that India has with all these countries. How do you think it could be upgraded now to sort of give out a message? But there is also sort of a flip side to that, because none of these Quad countries actually have a land border with China. So it's a complicated decision if India chooses to take at some level.
Yeah, sure. Let me start with your last point first, which is a point very well made by you, Shubhajit, that eventually on the ground in the India-China border areas, India will have to fight its own battle. You're not going to have Australian or US or Japanese troops coming there. No, not at all. But to the extent that geopolitically there can be some pressure built up against China, it is very, very important to build up our partnerships with all these countries, including in the quadrilateral. That is a messaging which sends its own sort of vibes. So all that has to be done. It is a package which we need to develop over time, and I hope that we're able to do it quickly. My deadlines would be we have to implement it before the end of 2020. And also, let me say that the summer of 2020 is still a long one and is going to continue to be a hot one on the India-China border areas. Don't expect this standoff to be resolved very soon. It's going to take time. It's going to take months. And India as a whole, not just the Indian army, India as a whole will have to show its resolve. I think the Chinese have shown their hand very clearly. I don't think we need to think too much and start worrying about balancing and what message is it sending to the Chinese. The Chinese have already sent you a message, have already sent us a message, have sent you and me a message.
Right.
And we have to read that message and react to it. I am not saying that we have to go back to a situation post 1962. We need to have channels of communication open, but we also need to take strong measures which will also hurt us to a certain extent, India to a certain extent, Indians to a certain extent, but which will send a clear-cut message to China that it is not going to be business as usual. We will also do whatever is necessary in this kind of new relationship which you have determined.
Right, right. We'll now move to some audience questions because there are a whole lot of questions that we have got, and we can start with Mr. Dhawan.
I'm asking, is it possible that USA, European and ASEAN countries club together to weaken China economically in view of the strong anti-China sentiments, and also block China's sea route and oil supplies via India Ocean and South China Sea? What are your views on this? And can China afford this?
I think we got the gist of the thing. Basically, it's talking about a global coalition, regional coalition to take on China. Mr. Bambawale,
you want me to answer it, Shubhajit, straight away? Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, sir. But the United States is very clear. They are already, and well before COVID also, for the last 2.5 years now, they have been in this trade and technology kind of war with China. And I think increasingly European countries are also seeing that China is a spoiler in certain parts of, say, for example, in this theft of intellectual property and so on. So I think economically there will be some kind of, there'll be some kind of war or some kind of battle between these countries. But I don't think it will translate into any kind of blocking of sea lanes and things like that. So we have to make a realistic assessment of this, and we have to make a clear-cut assessment of it.
Yeah, I think we'll move on to the next question. It's from Ms. Patnaik, Smriti Patnaik.
So my question is that, Ambassador, you were speaking of, how in 2013 the Chinese Prime Minister visit could not take place because of the Depsang, conflict. But how do you look at the Chumar conflict when Xi was visiting in 2014? Was it because there was some kind of differences of opinion between the PLA and the central member of the Chinese Communist Party, or how does one explain when when the president is visiting, you have a border conflict? My second question is that the Chinese intentions are very clear. The way they have encroached territory, very slowly and very steadily. So was Galwan a real surprise, or is it that we failed to take into account the previous incursion and put it in perspective? These are my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. They are very good questions and very pertinent questions. But the answer to both those questions is, both in 2014 at Chumar and now, and you said that they have been doing something over the past and so on. The answer is, and the difference is, that the numbers of troops which China has brought not only close to the LAC but a little behind the LAC also in a little depth are huge. As I said, there are several divisions, in this part of eastern Ladakh. So this is something which has never happened before. Even when the standoffs or the face-offs took place in 2013 in Depsang, 2014 in Chumar, the sort of reserve troops which were brought up were much smaller in number. So this is something completely different and therefore cannot be compared with either any kind of thing which has happened before, either 2013 or 2014. And that's the big difference. That is where also the larger message comes through about what they want to do and what they're trying to do.
Mr. Swaroop Mukherjee.
How far this particular incident at Ladakh is linked with the One Road, One Belt project and the annexation of POK by China to reach to the port and all this kind of basic securing the ROB situation? Is it linked with that?
Right. Thank you. Gautam?
Yeah, no, I don't think it is directly linked with it. Any number of suggestions are being offered as to why this is happening. I think the answers which are relevant, answer number 1 to 10 is one simple fact or two simple facts, as I said, one strategic, one tactical. The rest are, possibilities number 11, 12, 13, 20, 25, etc. And those facts are, they are trying to actually control ground up till what is their idea of the line of actual control. And strategically, they're sending India and the rest of the world a message that, look, we are the big boys here. We can do what we want. And you have to just understand your place in the pecking order. You have to roll over and let us roll you over and roll over you. So I think that is the simple message which is being sent. We can look for other factors. Those are less important. I don't think those are the critical factors. These two, one tactical, one strategic, are the real messages which the Chinese are sending us. And we should be very clear-eyed about understanding them, because only then will you be able to make a reassessment and a recalibration of our China policy.
Right. Before I move to the next question from the audience, your thought actually sparked a question in my mind that, China, you're saying, feels that it's the big boy, in the neighborhood and in the world, and it's taking on the US leadership. We are seeing it's receding in the role in the last few years, and that momentum is continuing. So China clearly sees a place for itself at the global table, that it is the global leader now. It feels that it is the leader. Now, in this kind of a situation, there is a tension that's playing out between US and China. And, this tension, will that lead to a sort of a Cold War era that India will have to live with in its neighborhood? Because just like Soviet Union and US had to live, were in a Cold War era. And at that point in time, India had to sort of stay non-aligned, and then it moved somewhat closer to Soviet Union. In this kind of a situation where China is your direct neighbor, immediate neighbor, can India survive in a US-China sort of a Cold War kind of a situation?
Yeah. No, I think the question is, can India survive the aggressiveness and aggression of China? And I think the answer to that is a clear yes. We have shown it clearly on the ground in Galwan. where incidentally we have blocked them at the LAC in case listeners are not aware. But you're not wrong, Shubhajit. The larger, the India-China thing is something which is very important for us, but which is less important for the Chinese. For them, the big ball game is their interaction and their sort of trade technology war with the United States, because that is the number one power in the world today, the United States, and by far militarily the biggest power in the world. China is a far number two in terms of military power. So I think you're not wrong. You're absolutely right. Whether a Cold War ensues, doesn't ensue, we'll have to wait and see, and we'll see how things develop. But I think we have to very clearly decide which side our bread is buttered on, and I can see which side is bread buttered on. In my opinion, it's buttered on the US side.
Right. That's a very interesting and important point coming from you, who handled the Indo-US nuclear deal negotiations back in Washington in 2007. The next caller is Miss Nimisha Singla. She's our. Can she go ahead with her question, please?
Good evening, Gautam sir. Good evening, Shubhajit sir. This has been a great, insightful session so far. But throughout this session, a couple of questions have come to my mind. A, what has led China to believe that it can show such kind of an aggression all over its boundaries and across all over the world? Given the COVID-19 situation, why is it not intimidated as such? B, that's very rightly said by Gautam sir that India, we've shown them at the LAC, we've stopped them at the border. But what can us civilians do? How can we sort of unite and come together and tell China that, hey, listen, I mean, all of our countries united and you cannot do this to us. And also, like I mentioned in the Q&A tab, how does Russia come into the play? Because I think foreign ministers met in the Moscow. They were hosted in Moscow in their victory parade. So what sort of went over there? Those are my questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nimisha. Those were excellent questions. Let me, and there were 2 or 3 of them. So let me start with the first part. Which is why does China think that this is the time to do whatever it's doing? See, when you look at, the Chinese have always believed that their comprehensive national power is much more than that of India. If you take GDP, the size of the GDP as a simple measure of comprehensive national power, India's GDP is close to $3 trillion. Chinese is close to $14 trillion. So in the Chinese view, they're 4.5 times more powerful than India. So they believe that, they can easily do this and India will just have to take it lying down. But I think, you have to factor in, and I'm sure our armed forces have factored in, that in order to defend a particular place or a particular point, you don't have to match the comprehensive national strength of the other side. You can do it with, with determinedness. You can do it with whatever the troops have been supplied with so far. And you can do it with bravery and courage like our soldiers have shown. As I said earlier, in sending a signal to China, we will need to, as you rightly say, all of us will need to contribute in this battle, not just our soldiers, but all of us. And by contributing, we need to be able to accept a certain amount of pain. In our case, you, me, Shubhajit, it is economic pain. The best way that all of you and all of us can signal to China is stop buying Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo handsets. Move to Samsung handsets. I'm not a spokesman for Samsung, by the way, but because it's a Korean company, just stop buying these. And if a large number of Indians do this actually over the next 6 months and maybe sustain it over 1 year, you will see the impact it has on these Chinese companies and in turn on China. So I think that's the answer to the 2 questions that you raised. And those are very good questions. Thank you very much for them.
Yeah. The next caller is Narayan Kumar.
Firstly, I was expecting Excellency to elaborate more on the Middle Kingdom and the kowtowing and other things which Henry Kissinger has written about in great detail in his book on China. Be that as it may, I just wanted to shift away from the diplomatic focus a bit. We have held talks with China since 1981, and specifically more than 22 rounds of talks since 2002. And we still had Depsang, Chumar, Doklam, and today Ladakh, where the ambassador has very clearly stated that it is in large numbers that the troops have amassed. There is clearly an objective behind this. Is it that we are merely postponing the inevitable, sir? Are we one click away from an armed conflict? Considering the fact that the rules of engagement have been changed, at least that is what we have heard from the Indian side. Thank you.
No, that's an excellent question, Mr. Narayan Kumar. A very, very good question. I believe, and you can talk to other people who are more specialized in military matters, but I believe that the corresponding build-up that we have done, not just in Eastern Ladakh, but across the entire 3,488 kilometers of the India-China LAC. Also, what transpired on the night of June 15th, where our troops, as I keep saying, gave a very good account of themselves in terms of sheer bravery and courage. I think that will prevent a larger scale conflict. And therefore, we have a very strong posture on the ground. And we need to maintain that very strong posture on the ground because, as you understand, it is only a strong military posture on the ground which can give diplomacy a chance and which will then bring in diplomatic play into effect. So I believe that our strong military posture will give him, he will have to think about it, because let me tell you very clearly that we have built up, and you have seen this in the newspaper reportage, that we have built up as much firepower and troop strength as he has. And so even on June 15th, I think we gave him as good as we got. So I think that is an important factor which will have to be considered. And he will also have to consider how far he wants to go in pushing this message, or has he already delivered the message and does he leave it there? I don't know the answers to that. I believe that the disengagement, de-escalation process is going to be long drawn and will take time. I don't know if it's going to be in months or years, but we will see as we move ahead. But I think the entire country has to be strong, as the young lady before you also mentioned. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. I had a sort of a question on related to this. You talked about repeatedly about the economic cost that India can inflict on China in this issue. Is that the only lever, credible, effective lever that India has? What else does India have in its toolkit?
No, it is the entire, we have gone through it one by one. We have discussed it. There's the economics of it. There's the military part of it. There is the international relations part of it. From January 2021, India is going to be a member of the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member. I think we can, make our presence felt there too. So it is going to be a series of these kind of steps and measures. But if you ask me, and I think that's where you were getting to, Shubhajit, the question of where exactly we can really hurt him, I think the answer is in the economic realm, in the economic realm.
You rightly pointed out, there are UN Security Council, India becomes non-permanent member from January. Then the G20 chair, India becomes in 2022. And also the WHO, India is part of the executive, board, it holds the chairmanship. So all these areas can they be a pain point where India can raise those issues and make things difficult for China by raising issues on, say, Taiwan, on Hong Kong, on Uyghur? Should India be much more proactive, much more aggressive in raising these issues?
We could consider that as one of the menu of options when we reassess our policy. But it also has to be well studied, well researched, in the sense that, are you going to get sizable support, say co-sponsors for a particular resolution? Is it going to, will the what you're trying to do, will it actually pass through the United Nations system, or will it, even if it fails, does it make the point we want to? So I think these are options which need to be studied, but we have to do it after careful assessment of each of these options.
So strategic coalition making, international coalition making will be is a tool in the toolkit of in India's diplomatic arsenal.
Absolutely.
Like India did during the NSG waiver, it actually got the entire world together, and then there was a reach out to the Chinese side. Or during Masood Azhar's listing, also the similar exercise took place. So that kind of outreach diplomatic campaign has to take place. If you were the Joint Secretary East Asia right now, would that be one of your ideas that you would put on the table?
No, look, I'm no longer in government, so I have the freedom of saying what I think and what so I have that latitude.
Yeah.
I think governments, their hands are more closely tied.
Right.
So let me not preempt what the government is thinking. But there can be no doubt in my mind, and there's no doubt, I think, in your mind, Shubhajit, that we will need to send a tough message. We will need to send that this cannot be business as usual. Because if we don't send that tough message, then we'll be contradicting the message that we have sent on the ground through our military forces.
Right.
And we cannot do that. So we will have to reassess and reset our China policy, because only then will you be sending the same message that we have sent militarily on the ground.
Right.
And if you get your messages, if you go back to business as usual, the Chinese will think that, okay, the Indians have agreed and acquiesced to our whatever we have done.
Right.
So we just cannot afford to do that.
Right. So next audience question is from Annie Bhardwaj. Is she there?
Sir, actually, I wanted to ask about the Russia-China relationship. As we know that the relationship was not very good, but in recent years, the relationship has improved a lot. So how do you see that vis-a-vis India? And sir, another question was that how do you see the convergence and divergence of Russia and China relations in a strategic location like Central Asia? So these were the two questions that I wanted to ask.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, I think they are excellent questions. Look, Russia is a very important partner for India. There is no doubting that. But we'll have to test the relationship by what Russia does and what it says and how it acts. So I think this is still something which we will need to see as we progress. Yes, I agree that Russia is an excellent, important partner for India. On the other hand, the Russia-China relationship, as you have very rightly pointed out, has changed dramatically over the past decade. And we will just have to, we'll have to feel our way forward. We'll have to see how Russia can support us as we move ahead in our reset China policy.
Right, right. Just a follow up to that, we have a history with Russia. There's a historical relationship with Soviet Union, and which then post Cold War era, we've seen the relationship change. Their support during 71 war was very, very key, crucial. 62 war, it was ambivalent at that point of time. So how dependable is Russia, and can Russia lean on China at this moment?
Yeah. No, so I don't know the answers to those questions, and I don't think we will know till we actually test it out on the ground. So Russia is an important partner of India. There is no gainsaying that. There's no doubting that. But in a India-China situation, we will have to see how it plays out. We'll have to test the ground. I don't know which way it will work, but I don't want to make a prediction because predictions are always very difficult. But we'll have to wait and see.
But with the US, are you confident that India can count on US support?
See, we have to be careful about how we go ahead, and we move ahead with the US too. Look, between any two nation states, the interests of those states are always important. At this point of time, I think there is a coincidence of interests. The China-US relationship is also deteriorating. The India-China relationship has also deteriorated in the last few months and will deteriorate further in the coming months, in my opinion. So there is a matching of interests, and I think our strengthening of our partnerships with democracies across the world, including the US, Japan, Australia, maybe Indonesia, is something which will happen.
Right. So the next question is from Mr. Kabir.
As we saw that as India-Pak relationship deteriorated, SAARC lost its earlier relevance and it was never a mainstream priority for India. So how do you think that Galwan clash, what impact does the Galwan clash would have on India-China relations, of course, and the organizations like BRICS and RIC where India and China are prominent members? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's Kabir. That is a very interesting question. I congratulate you on asking this. But you're not wrong. You're right. As I just said in answer to the earlier question, in my opinion, and I let us see if what I'm saying is right. India-China relationship has deteriorated over the last 2-3 months, and it is set to deteriorate even more in the coming months. If that happens, I think you're right. There will be strain on RIC, there will be strain on BRICS, there will be strain within the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So you're absolutely right there. I think you've hit the nail on the head. You have really pointed out something which could be a casualty of a deteriorating India-China relationship. But once again, we'll have to see how this plays out. But I think what you're saying is very correct, is not wrong at all. It will probably prove to be right. And thank you for a very good question.
Yeah. Mr. Bambawale, we've now towards the end of the session, towards almost nearing end of the session, I would like to ask final couple of questions before I wrap up this session. As the Indian ambassador in China right now, as Indian diplomats, work towards resolution of this particular situation, can they reach out to the sort of people who have stakes in India? We talked about the economic relationship, economic costs. So, for example, the construction majors in China who have stakes in India, who have projects, who are doing projects in India, or say Huawei manufacturers, or the power equipment manufacturers in China. Can the Indian embassy there reach out to these constituencies to, in a sense, give a message that the government of the day, the military of China, should restore the status quo ante, otherwise they would suffer losses? Is that a constituency?
That is a possibility. It's a possibility, Shubhajit, you're not wrong. And we will, of course, I'm sure our diplomats, who are very, very competent, will be using every possible way of doing it. I saw from newspaper and media reportage that our ambassador in China, in Beijing, would be also reaching out to the central military commission of China, which actually dictates policy. So these kind of communication channels must continue. I'm not arguing that we must snap or cut those. Not at all. We must continue that, and they will use every possible leverage. They'll use every possible channel of communication to send this message. But I think what you have said is very correct. As far as India is concerned, we cannot move from the position that the Chinese army, the Chinese PLA must restore the status quo ante. And therefore, our diplomats and all of us, India as a whole, will have to be very determined. We will have to be very, very, pushing of this agenda of ours, and nothing less than that. Anything less than that would be a compromise. And we cannot let go of this fact that the Chinese PLA must restore the status quo ante.
So, as we wrap up, two things come out in my mind, and I would want to know, do you see the question that has actually been underlying in a lot of these questions and a lot of questions came on the chat box, will there be a escalation? Will there be a war? Do you foresee that possibility?
Look, as I said earlier, I think the probability of that is very low. But as far as the armed forces of India are concerned, I think that's an eventuality which they will prepare for. Any armed force does that. So I think our very robust military posture will continue, and we will prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. But I think the probability of that is low, and it is low because we have a strong military posture, as I tried to outline earlier also. So I cannot answer that question in a clear-cut yes or no, but I hope I have answered it satisfactorily.
Of course, but if the disengagement and de-escalation has to happen, by when do you think it can happen? Can it happen like the Doklam incident, which wrapped up in about 2.5 months, or it will go till the winter, or like Sundarangchu, where it went almost a year or more? Do you foresee that happening? Which?
Yeah, I cannot. It's very difficult to predict or foretell this. We will have to just wait and see. But you're not wrong that the winters, April to October is doable. But beyond that, the weather deteriorates very sharply. You remember that Eastern Ladakh is also, in terms of its topography, etc., it is an area where you don't have much oxygen. But at the same time, the armed forces will be prepared for every eventuality. So I don't want to answer that directly because I don't know the answer to it. But we will be prepared. I think India as a nation, as a country, as a society, we need to be prepared for the worst for months, maybe even years.
Right. So we have to be prepared for months and maybe even years before the standoff is resolved. Thank you, Mr. Bambawale, for this very interesting and insightful conversation. We really got a sense of the situation there, your assessment, and also the difficult choices that are there in front of us. In a sense, the seeds of conflict lead us to the seeds of resolution. Thank you for helping us to cut through this fog and explaining this situation. For students of India-China relations like us, I think you must consider writing a book to educate us further. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all the viewers from all over the country. Some have joined us from different parts of the world. Thank you to all of us. Thank you to all of you for joining in today. Your questions, ideas, thoughts really enriched the conversation, and it added value. We couldn't take all the questions, but I think we were able to answer most of them. by the end of this hour and a half long discussion. For those who missed the webinar, the video of this interaction will be online shortly. And to read, listen, and view more of Indian Express's explanatory journalism, do log on to our website. And till the next edition of the E-xplained event, stay safe and stay tuned. Goodbye. Thank you.